Have you ever had to face the harsh truth about someone you thought would never hurt you? Imagine this. You go to work every day with faith in a company, but one day you discover that everything you've been doing is building an empire for someone you never expected. How do you confront that? Can you accept the truth? Picture this scene. You see that person, someone you thought was weak, someone who did the simplest job in the company. But they're actually the CEO, and you had no idea. How will you react when everything you thought about them and your company suddenly changes? If this question piques your curiosity, don't forget to leave your thoughts and subscribe so you won't miss the next unexpected, intense, and fascinating stories. James Anderson stood before the elevator doors, holding a mop and bucket, feeling as if a heavy weight was pressing on his heart. This wasn't the first time he'd entered the company, but this time everything was completely different. He wasn't an executive or a director. He was a janitor, a faceless figure in the eyes of everyone. The people who passed by him had no idea that the man mopping the floors was the one who had taken over the company they worked for, the one they had always admired from afar. Walking into the towering building, the light from the shiny windows reflected his image, but no one noticed. Instead of wearing a sharp suit and shiny shoes, James chose to wear simple work clothes, old sneakers, and a red name tag that read, Janitor, pinned to his chest. All eyes were on those dressed in blazers and shirts, busy with their office lives, completely ignoring him. But that's exactly what he wanted. He didn't want power or respect, at least not right now. He wanted to understand what was really happening under the shiny facade of the company he had acquired. He wanted to see what the company culture was truly like, whether it truly respected its employees or if it was just empty words masking discrimination and arrogance. Every step James took was filled with tension. He passed by employees, hearing conversations all around him, but no one saw him. He overheard laughter behind people's backs about colleagues, strategies of the company that no one cared to view from the bottom of the social hierarchy. He heard two junior executives, Ryan and Brad, discussing hiring unqualified candidates just to meet diversity standards. They had no idea that the person they were mocking was the company's new chairman, the one who had the power to decide their fate. No one could understand the anxiety James was feeling. He wasn't just an outsider. He was living in a reality not always easy to see. He felt regret for the falseness of a work environment full of discrimination and lack of respect. He felt powerless, as those who seemed to hold power were complacent, treating others as tools, as people unworthy of standing on equal ground with them. But in James's mind, there was still a flicker of hope. He believed that these things could change, that true change would not come from meetings or reports, but from the smallest actions. He decided he would not give up, no matter how many people tried to suppress him. The following hours passed in silence. James worked as an invisible man, cleaning stains off the floor, wiping windows, and walking past the arrogant conversations of the executives. A day passed, and everything seemed the same. But James knew he had learned something. He had witnessed the corruption running rampant in this company, and now was the time for change. Then an unexpected twist happened. When James walked into the conference room where the senior executives were gathered, no one recognized him. He walked in holding the mop, acting like a janitor, ignoring the strange looks and mockery from those around him. But when the conversation shifted to an unpleasant topic, James stood up straight, looked each person in the room in the eye. His gaze was no longer faint or invisible. He was James Anderson, the man who had taken over the company. And now it was time to bring everything to light. Could James do it? Could change come from someone no one recognized? From someone who had endured so much injustice and prejudice? He wasn't just fighting to prove the truth. He was fighting to change an environment where the truth had been buried beneath a shiny facade. James wasn't just a janitor. He was the one who would clean up the entire company from the inside out. Throughout a long day, James Anderson quietly went about cleaning, moving through the company's hallways while his mind kept turning over everything he had witnessed. He didn't just see the cold stares and mocking comments. He saw the lack of respect that those in power had for workers like him. These were the senior executives, Benjamin King, Michael Clark, and Daniel Hall. They stood above everyone else, looking down from on high, and in their eyes, employees like him were nothing more than invisible shadows. James watched them from a distance, the way they walked confidently, each gesture dripping with arrogance. They never spared a glance or a word for those around them. While they discussed growth strategies and global expansion plans, James saw the rudeness in how they treated each other and others. A sarcastic joke between Benjamin and Michael about an important contract made Daniel laugh, as if the decisions they were making had nothing to do with the emotions or effort of the workers. Anger began to rise within James. He couldn't stay silent, couldn't turn a blind eye when these people, who should be role models, acted this way. But what hurt him most was their indifference. They didn't realize that those behind them, the ones sweating with every step, were the ones who had created the success they were so proud of. How could they not see that? Regret welled up inside James. He regretted for people like Melanie Torres and James Holloway, people who didn't deserve to witness such things, people who worked their hardest but were ignored and disrespected, while people like Benjamin King, Michael Clark, and Daniel Hall, those who rarely knew the price of hard work, kept rising through the ranks. Their arrogant glances weighed heavily on James's heart. He remembered the mocking words from the executives, the sarcastic stories about colleagues, things that hurt people like him, people who never had a chance to show what they were capable of. But amid all the darkness, a glimmer of hope appeared. James began to realize that these disrespectful actions, these condescending looks, were the fuel he needed to change everything. Not in a day, not in an hour, but he believed he could make it happen. He started asking himself, could he change this? Could he make these leaders recognize the importance of the hardworking people behind the scenes? The anger inside him still surged, but instead of letting it consume him, James found a way to control it, searching for opportunities to prove that change doesn't come from empty promises, but from small, powerful actions. And one of those moments came when he overheard a conversation in the break room between Michael Clark and Daniel Hall. Melanie Torres, a young colleague, spoke to him in a way that took him by surprise. She didn't just see him as a regular janitor. She showed empathy and appreciation for the work he was doing. James realized that not everyone in the company was the same. Those words, those small gestures of encouragement, made him feel a connection to the good people around him, as if he could rise from this resilience and change everything. With emotions mixed between surprise, disappointment, and hope, James prepared for the next steps. He couldn't stay silent. He couldn't let this lack of respect continue. The journey for change began here, not just about power, but about fairness, respect, and creating a work environment that truly valued people. James continued his work in silence, his hands gliding over the floor, the mop merely a tool to collect the pieces of a puzzle he was determined to unveil. Secretive conversations echoed around him, each word a fragment of the rot eating away at the company from within. He had learned to work unnoticed, but everything he heard, every contemptuous glance, every mocking word felt like a knife to his heart, especially from Sophia Wilson and Matthew Lee, whom James knew all too well for their arrogance and absurdity. Their words were like lashes, relentlessly striking at the spirits of the silent workers, like James, like the others they never paid attention to. I really don't understand why we have to keep hiring these people, Sophia said, her gaze fixed on the workers rushing by the conference room window. Matthew Lee added, "All they do is cause trouble. No one here can work like we do." Those insults tore apart the calm atmosphere that once existed in the company. James stood there, just a few steps away, but no one knew who he was. He didn't say a word, only taking note of his thoughts. He had witnessed these gestures, these contemptuous looks for a long time, but now it wasn't just part of the job. It was a mark of the injustice, the disrespect he faced every day. Regret surged within him because he knew that these people, these absurd, arrogant individuals, had no idea that they were slowly killing the very company they believed they owned. And more painfully, they didn't understand the sacrifices, the silent contributions of the workers, people like James. His hope never faded. He couldn't let this corruption continue. He needed to act, but quietly, cautiously. With each passing day, he continued to observe, listen, and gather information without anyone knowing. For in those small conversations, those careless jabs, he saw the truth he had been searching for. And what surprised him most was that, although he wasn't one of the insiders, he felt a deep connection with the ordinary workers, those who had nothing but their full dedication. At times, he wondered, would everything change if the truth were revealed? Would people like Sophia and Matthew ever recognize the truth behind the glitter they had created? Could this company awaken from its arrogance? These questions swirled in James's mind, and with every step he took, with every breath he inhaled, the answers gradually became clearer. The more he observed, the more James realized that change couldn't come from those who were used to power and dominance. Change had to come from people like him, the silent ones, but the determined ones. He knew that, although this path was fraught with difficulty and hardship, if there was one thing that could change everything, it was the connection between people with a shared goal, and that was a goal James would never abandon. James stood silently in the gleaming hallways of the office, the mop bucket gently pushed forward. Everything around him felt cold, unfamiliar, and empty. Although he was right in his own company, the sense of loneliness weighed even more heavily on him. The glances that passed him by were fleeting, with no one really noticing him. No words of greeting, only whispers and quiet insults surrounding him. He could feel the discrimination, the disdain from the senior executives, those who had worked with him before he decided to step into this environment with a different identity. Throughout the day, James heard it all. The mockery from Sophia, the contemptuous stories from Matthew Lee. The lower-level employees had to endure the indifference and arrogance of the leaders. But then, just when everything seemed too much to bear, when James's hope started to fade, something unexpected happened. Charlotte King, a lower-level employee whom James had never really paid attention to, approached him. She didn't exude any power or wealth, just an ordinary employee in a simple shirt, holding a neatly folded napkin in her hand. Charlotte didn't say much, just gave a gentle smile, her eyes meeting James's with empathy. "This is for you," she said softly, handing him the napkin with a handwritten note. "I understand you." That moment, though it was a small act, stirred an unusual feeling in James's heart. Those simple yet meaningful words felt like a breath of fresh air, soothing the loneliness and exhaustion inside him. The feeling of being neglected and despised by the powerful people in the company seemed to vanish. He couldn't believe that someone as ordinary as Charlotte could give him a napkin with such a sincere gesture of encouragement. And that moment made him question, is it possible, in a place full of respect, for people to still find connection and compassion? James realized he wasn't alone. While the executives continued to joke and belittle others, Charlotte was the only one brave enough to step outside the flashy norms and do something truly humane. This not only surprised him, but it also made him feel loved, respected. Such small acts might not change things instantly, but they were the spark needed to ignite change. With the napkin in his hand, James felt stronger. He wasn't just working for the company, he was working to find people like Charlotte, those who still held on to kindness in a world full of deceit and corruption. This was part of the connection he had been searching for all along. While many might see James as an anonymous janitor, Charlotte saw him as a real person, someone of value. That encouragement eased his anxiety. James knew that the company needed change, not just from the top down, but from small actions by the workers themselves. And Charlotte, though a lower-level employee, had given him hope, something he hadn't expected. Change doesn't always come from big meetings or decisions made by the executives. Sometimes it only takes a small act from one person, and that can change everything. The long, grueling workday finally came to an end, but James Anderson didn't feel relieved. As everyone left the company, he remained behind, quietly mopping the floors and observing his surroundings. The light from the dim hallway lamps reflected off the clean floors, creating a vacant, cold space where no one could hear the whispers echoing in his mind. He had witnessed so much throughout the day. Every word, every action had been etched into his memory, and they all led to one painful conclusion. This company wasn't just lacking respect from the leadership, it was a corrupt system, a place that had been sick at its very core. As he walked through the long hallways, where no one paid attention to him, James realized something. Everyone here, from powerful executives like Benjamin King and Michael Clark to the lowest-ranking employees, were living in a staged performance. They smiled, shook hands, communicated as if they were part of a smoothly operating system. But beneath the surface, there was deception and deep division. Casual conversations about new strategies, sales plans, and innovation projects. But underneath the glossy exterior were hostility, insults, and a lack of mutual respect. In a brief moment, James stopped and observed a surprising scene. In the meeting room, where all the executives had just held a meeting to discuss new strategies, he overheard words that were anything but kind. One of the executives, Chase Donovan, mocked a lower-ranking employee who was presenting a report. "Oh, look at this. Does anyone still believe in these plans?" he asked sarcastically. The group burst into laughter, as if it were some kind of funny joke. James gripped the handle of the mop tightly, his hands tightening in anger. But he knew not everything he saw today was the truth. He sensed that not everyone here was like that, but the system needed to change. A sense of helplessness rose within him as he realized that while there were people like Melanie Torres and James Holloway who still held on to integrity, they were in the minority. This company, once drowned in ambition and arrogance, made it hard for one person to change anything. But James didn't give up. He continued working in silence, not just to mop the floors, but to gather information, to understand the people he was facing. He needed to be sure that the change he dreamed of would not just be an empty promise, but real, tangible action. He turned back and looked into the reflection in the glass window of the building, his own image, the man who had struggled for years to get to this position, but now found himself feeling like an outsider. The image of a man in work clothes, holding a mop, standing in his own office, facing a harsh reality. But that mirror didn't just reflect James's outer image. It reflected his inner struggle, his determination, and a hope that he wouldn't just stop at cleaning these cold floors. He would rebuild this entire company from what had been discarded. In the end, he decided this wasn't just about changing the way the company worked. It was about changing the culture that had been deeply ingrained here. A culture that valued arrogance over kindness. A culture that made people like Charlotte King, those who had never been noticed, feel invisible in their own company. James understood that if he didn't change how people treated each other from the root, no strategy could save the corruption that had eroded the foundation of this company. And he, with everything he had witnessed, was the first to stand up and change it. The next morning, everything changed. James Anderson, who had silently carried out his janitorial duties for so many days, walked into the boardroom dressed in the sharp suit of a CEO. No more work clothes, no more mop in his hand, just the image of a different man, a new James, one that no one in the company recognized immediately. Each step he took echoed through the silence, bringing a sense of surprise and astonishment. All eyes turned toward him, each person confused, unsure of what was happening. When the door to the meeting room opened, the atmosphere inside instantly became tense. The executives, who were used to each other's presence in these power-filled meetings, suddenly seemed frozen. They had never seen a CEO like this before, never witnessed anyone walk into the room with such calm and confidence. James glanced across each face, everyone trying to analyze the situation. Was this some kind of joke? A strange scenario to test their patience? But no, this was not a joke. It was the truth, and James knew that this was the moment for the company to change, for a new era to begin. Everyone in the room could feel the tension rise. Their hearts tightened, but James, oddly enough, felt a strange sense of calm. He had spent so many days listening, observing, and now was the time to take the next step. The people in front of him, from the arrogant executives to the disrespectful leadership staff, would all have to face profound change. James was no longer the outsider, no longer the one cleaning up forgotten corners of the company. He was the one in charge, the one leading the transformation. A surprising twist, a shift that no one had anticipated. They still didn't fully understand what was happening, but James was determined not only to change the way things worked, but also to change how they saw and treated each other within the company. He turned back to look at the bewildered faces, then smiled gently. It wasn't arrogance, nor was it mockery. It was a new connection, a hope for those who had been overlooked for so many years. The insults and disrespect would no longer stand. He understood there would be many challenges ahead, but now he was ready to face them. Would these executives understand the message he brought? Would they realize that power isn't built on oppression, but on respect and collaboration? James wasn't in a hurry. He just needed them to recognize this naturally. He stood there in the middle of the boardroom, where all eyes were on him, and then he began. His words weren't grandiose speeches. They were words from the heart, things he had felt throughout his time witnessing the company's culture. Everyone listened, unable to resist being drawn into every word. This wasn't just one person's battle, but the struggle of the entire team. James knew that change wouldn't come overnight, but if he could plant the seeds of hope in the good people of the company, if he could help them realize that connection and love are vital elements in building a strong team, then that change would happen. The question now wasn't whether he could do it, but whether the people around him were ready to embrace a new company, a new culture, one where respect wasn't just for those in power, but for everyone. The meeting room seemed to shrink as James Anderson walked in, the man who had once been a janitor, now standing among the executives he had observed for so long. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't mocking or seeking revenge. Instead, he chose to remain calm and composed as he presented everything he had witnessed and felt during his time working here. He looked directly at each person in the room, the tension gradually building, yet he kept his gaze firm and steady. Every word James spoke was interrupted by the heavy silence in the room. He spoke of the disrespectful behavior he had witnessed, the offensive conversations between the executives, and the arrogant actions they freely displayed, regardless of the roles and positions of others in the company. These weren't just rumors, they were truths James had stored in his mind since his days as a janitor. He hadn't just done his job, he had taken on another task. Observing what was happening in the company environment he had now taken over. A wave of regret passed through him as he recalled moments when he witnessed discrimination, contempt, and the indifference from executives toward lower-level employees. But James didn't let those emotions take over. He knew that in order to bring about change, he had to face the truth, and today was the day these people would have to confront their own actions. James spoke firmly, but without haste, looking into each face as he continued discussing the lack of respect he had seen, stories they thought no one had heard, but in fact, all of it had been recorded in his mind. Eyes began to meet across the room, some surprised, while others seemed unable to admit what they had done. Did they feel ashamed? Or would they continue to hide the truth? James didn't expect an immediate apology, but he knew that today they could no longer deny their actions. Every word from James wasn't just an exposure, it was a reminder of their responsibility to the company and to the people working under them. A surprising twist came when James began pointing out the power dynamics within the company, the under-the-table dealings, and how these executives had exploited their positions. He was no longer an outsider. He was the one responsible for bringing fairness. His words hit them like a massive wave, forcing each person in the room to reassess their behavior. The silence that followed was heavy, but beneath that silence was a sense of nervousness and fear from those who had long been accustomed to the comfort of power without accountability. James paused for a moment, giving those in the room space to reflect. He didn't need to shout or raise his voice to make them feel the gravity of the situation. He simply needed them to listen, to truly listen, because what he was saying wasn't just criticism. It was an opportunity for everyone to realize their wrongdoings. Questions arose in each person's mind. Can we continue like this? Can we keep ignoring the people around us? Finally, James ended his speech with a short yet powerful statement. This is not a place for you to maintain arrogance. This is a place where we must work together, not crush one another. His words echoed in the air, no longer a reprimand, but a call for change. And although not everyone was ready to change immediately, from this moment forward, they could no longer turn their backs on the truth that James had laid out. The executives sat there, some with their heads bowed, others unable to face him. They knew they could no longer deny the truth. James had done what no one dared to do. He didn't just expose the corruption within the company, he also gave the good people a chance to change. The connection he created wasn't through power or words, but through action, helping everyone realize that they could do better, and this company could be better if they respected each other, truly respected each other. The meeting room was heavy with silence, as all eyes were fixed on James Anderson. He stood among the executives, the very people who had once seen him as insignificant, now the one holding the power to determine their fates. Executives like Daniel Hall, Michael Clark, and Sophia Wilson, who had once thought of themselves as untouchable, now sat in the room with frozen expressions. They knew this battle wasn't just about power, it was about change, change that they could no longer stop. James didn't need to make a scene. He only needed to say what these people had been avoiding for far too long. He looked at each one of them, his gaze not filled with anger, but with resolve and justice. "Today," he began, his voice low but steady, "this company will undergo a major restructuring." Those words hit like a shockwave, leaving everyone in the room stunned, unable to stop the rising tension in their hearts. They couldn't imagine what would come next, and there was nothing they could do to resist. Surely none of them had been prepared for this. "Daniel Hall, Michael Clark, Sophia Wilson," James continued, each name echoing clearly like a verdict. "You will be fired immediately for your misconduct." It was a slap in the face, an unbelievable turn of events for those who had always been protected by the shield of power. They were silent, their faces filled with regret, but no anger or excuses left. James's words cut through the fog that had clouded the company, exposing the wrongdoings they had hidden for so long. The lower-level employees, who had endured contempt and unfair treatment, could no longer hide the hope rising within them. A revolution had begun, and James was not just the new leader, he was the symbol of change. He didn't need to say much. One bold decision had proven that justice would prevail. In the shock of the moment, some executives remained still, too stunned to respond, while others, like Michael Clark, began to feel the fear creep in. Could they hold on to their powerful positions? Would the company really change, or was this just a temporary illusion? Those questions seemed to have no answer in that moment. The tension lingered in the air, and the executives began to sense their helplessness. They had played by their own rules for so many years, but now they were facing the consequences of their own actions. As for James, though he didn't feel satisfaction, his heart was filled with hope. He had seen the change begin. Every word he spoke, every decision he made, was a connection with the true employees, those who wanted this company to become a fairer place. And in this moment, James knew he was doing the right thing. This company would not only be restructured organizationally, but spiritually as well. They were stepping into a new era, an era of respect, justice, and true change. James stood still in the meeting room, his cold gaze sweeping over the executives who had just been fired, those who once believed they were untouchable. The tension in the air was almost tangible as the wrongdoers could do nothing but lower their eyes to the floor, unable to face the decisions James had made. Yet, inside him, there was no sense of satisfaction, only regret for what had been lost throughout this process. James had witnessed their actions over the years, arrogance, injustice, and poor decisions. But he hadn't come here to simply punish them. He had come to create change. With the wrongdoers gone, he couldn't let the company fall into ruin. Now, those with integrity, those who didn't let greed cloud their work, had a chance for a fresh start. Among them were Charlotte King and William Turner, two individuals who had proven themselves in every small task within the company, who would now be promoted. Charlotte, always dedicated to her work, with a sincere heart and a willingness to help colleagues, had proven to be the model employee. William, who maintained fairness and knew how to listen to his team, had been recognized as an untapped talent. When James announced their promotions, a sense of trust and pride welled up inside them. It wasn't just a reward for their efforts. It was an affirmation that the company would never again overlook respect and fairness. This change wasn't a coincidence. It was part of a larger plan to rebuild a new work environment, an environment where respect and fairness would be prioritized. James wanted all employees to understand that no matter who they were, they deserved to be treated fairly, evaluated based on their true abilities rather than their power dynamics. He wanted to bring the company to a place where arrogance and disrespect had no place. In that moment, James looked at the remaining people in the room, Charlotte and William. Their gazes were not only filled with gratitude, but also with hope. Hope for a future where they could give their best without fear of being looked down upon or overlooked. But even in that moment, James couldn't help but wonder, would these changes be enough to completely erase the corruption that had deeply rooted itself within the system? Could this company truly come back stronger after all it had been through? That question lingered in his mind, but James knew that his decision today was the first step toward rebuilding an environment of fairness and respect. People like Charlotte and William deserve the opportunity to serve as role models for others in the company. And it was that hope that would guide James through the challenges ahead as he continued to fight not just to change the company, but to change the entire workplace culture. James stood firm at the head of the table, his gaze unwavering as he stared down the executives, who now felt the tension in the air. The room was filled with silence, and each person understood that this meeting was unlike the others. There would be no empty promises or fake apologies. This was the moment real change would begin. This company will no longer tolerate arrogance, disrespect, or the condescending attitude toward those without titles or high status, James said, his voice firm, each word cutting straight into the minds of those present. The employees in the room exchanged glances, some feeling surprised, while others had a glimmer of hope in their eyes. They no longer felt overlooked, no longer felt like mere pawns in the hands of the powerful. James looked at each face, one by one, then continued, "What you do, what you contribute, will be the only thing that determines your worth here. Not your title, not your position, but your actual ability. This is the opportunity for everyone to prove themselves and elevate this company." His words rang out like a declaration, a challenge to all those who thought they could continue trampling others simply because of their status. Everyone could feel the power in James's voice. It was not just a statement, but a commitment, a declaration that real change was on its way. In that moment, James noticed the faces of the old employees, Charlotte King, William Turner, James Holloway, those who had always strived, who had endured, now smiling gently. That smile was trust. It was the connection between him and them. James knew that this decision would not just change the company, but also change their lives. They would no longer work in an environment filled with deceit and fear. And then, as the meeting came to an end, something unimaginable happened. The entire room stood and clapped, not out of fear or obligation, but because they truly felt proud. Proud to have someone like James at the helm, someone they could trust, someone who had brought a new hope for the future. The unexpected ending for James was when he looked into the eyes of each employee and saw a new belief ignited within them. And he understood that with the profound changes he had just implemented, this company would never go back to the way it was. This story teaches us an important lesson about the value of fairness, respect, and real ability. It's not titles or status that determine a person's worth, but their contributions, efforts, and actual capabilities. Sometimes, real change begins with bold decisions and courageous actions, rather than empty words. The story also emphasizes that in a workplace environment, mutual respect, fairness, and encouragement for everyone to grow are the keys to building a strong organization. When we allow people to demonstrate their true abilities and recognize real value, we don't just change a company, we change the lives of the people who work within it. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our future uploads. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even better content for you.